Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Li Jianhua. Our top stories. NVIDIA says artificial intelligence is at a tipping point. Stocks surge and the world's most valuable chip maker reports record revenue.
Mercedes-Benz posts solid fourth-quarter earnings, but its CEO is wary of growing competition from Chinese rivals. Plus,
China encourages both parties to accommodate each other's legitimate concerns.
China urges the United Nations top court to speak out on what it says is unlawful Israeli occupation.
And as the conflict in Ukraine nears its third year, we travel on the train line that's connecting loved ones with those battling on the front line. The head of the world's most valuable chip maker, NVIDIA, says artificial intelligence is at a tipping point as it announced record sales. NVIDIA posted revenue of over $22 billion in the 3 months to the end of January. That's a rise of 265% year-on-year. Net income surged nearly 770%.
NVIDIA chips are used to train large AI models, such as those developed by Microsoft and Meta. Our correspondent John Territ is at the New York Stock Exchange. John, so NVIDIA didn't disappoint investors for sure.
Jianhua, Robin, absolutely not. You know, it's really funny because the results came out when we were on the air doing the Washington, D.C. version of this very program at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon local time yesterday. And they were delayed and delayed and delayed, and we couldn't get the live number on the air, which we were very upset about. You know me, I wanted to get the information out there, and it wasn't being published. So it's great to be able to do this program and tell you all the hot details. Look, people are wandering around this floor today going, we've never seen anything like it. We can't remember the last time this happened. This is the conversation. I was just talking to my guru, Mikey, who sits here, and another guru called Jay, who's gone away now. And they reckon the last time we saw anything like this was when Apple came out with its iPhone. And the first quarter or the second quarter maybe after that, there was this kind of excitement. And in the UK, where you are, I was in the UK then. I remember a company called lastminute.com. Do you remember that? Run by a woman called Martha Lane Fox. And everybody got overexcited about this. It was basically a travel agency. It's kind of fizzled out now, but back in 2001, 2002, that was the hottest stock around, and that's where we're at with NVIDIA right now. Eye-popping results, and they are now, those results, driving the New York markets, as I will show you in just a second. NVIDIA's market cap is going up all the time. Last week it overtook Alphabet and Amazon. It is now number 3 and catching up with Microsoft and Apple. Really quite extraordinary. In a way, of course, no real surprise, because we know that NVIDIA is the company of the moment. It has the product of the moment, which is high-end microchips to drive artificial intelligence. Now, Jensen Huang is the boss. We've got to be a little bit careful with what he says. I know he's saying that we're at a tipping point, but those of us who know Jensen know that he says that all the time. You know, when they brought their first chip out, oh, it's a tipping point, you know. And now they've got all this success going on. Oh, we're at a tipping point. It's kind of his mantra, if you will. It's like his catchphrase. So you do have to bear that in mind. But what they did say in the call, which is really driving things, is that they recognize that the revenue growth in 2024 is going to beat Wall Street expectations. And that's the key behind the share price hike right now. They show that demand is very strong, going all the way through 2024, not only from their big customers like Microsoft and Meta Platforms and Amazon, but also from smaller companies that they think they're going to be able to draw in. And the next thing that they're going to look at is AI as it relates to government and international trade relations and things like that. So there's clearly an area that they're looking to expand into right there. Slight downside, well, China's slowdown, I think, probably dented the figures a little bit, can you believe it? And also their competitors are likely to go ahead and try and design their own chips in the future. But that's a long way in the future. For now, NVIDIA is the company, and the shares are up 15% right now, $777 a piece, back above $700. They were down below that yesterday. Lifting all boats, a rising tide lifts all boats. Microsoft up 2%, Amazon 2%, Meta 3.6%. And if we turn to the main markets now, the Dow is in record territory, up 220 points. So's the S&P 500, up 75 points. The Nasdaq's up 2%. So, and I noticed also the Nikkei in Japan in the last 12 hours or so. There was applause in where they have the Nikkei in Tokyo because it has surpassed its highest level. And the last time, because of this, and the last time it was there was in 1989, before Japan slumped into its economic difficulties that it's only now coming out of. So we have NVIDIA to thank for all of this.
Thanks, John, for the update. That is our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Well, plenty more to talk about when it comes to NVIDIA. Let's bring in Santosh Rao, who's head of research at Manhattan Venture Partners. Good to see you again, Santosh. So as we were hearing there, NVIDIA again has beaten expectations. Why is it doing so well, both in itself and compared to its competitors?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to be here. Let me throw in my share of superlatives. I mean, knock the cover off the ball, fantastic, superlative, everything. So this was a great quarter by any respects. I think that the thing going for them is they are at the right place at the right time. They have a lead on the other companies. They dominate the GPU space, the chip space. So I think their execution was expected. Their outperformance was expected. And for them, the market expected at this level, they needed to not only beat the estimates and raise the guidance as well. And that's what they're doing. So 24 is expected to be good. 25 is expected to be good. So for analysts like me, the big question is how far and how long can they go on? And I believe they can continue to go on. They still have a good lead. Tipping point, I agree with him. There's a lot more to go. It's opening up new avenues. So a lot more to go. So this is just the beginning. Great execution, great performance, great report.
So as you said there, the forecast for 2024, 25 still positive, but can this continue? Are we looking here at a bubble that will perhaps end up bursting?
Yeah, so let me kind of moderate what I just said. It's not a bubble. It's definitely a nice secular tailwind behind it. The whole space is growing. AI is expected to really change a lot of things. I think they're doing very well. They'll continue to do well. It's a long, so it's not a bubble. It's at least 5-year run. They have a lead on other companies. Yes, there's some cautionary notes. The percentage of beats is getting lesser and lesser. Competition is coming. A lot of other, the demand is spreading out. It's getting more wider, so that's helpful. But overall, things will slow down at one point. But at this point, there's tremendous demand. There's pent-up demand, new people still coming in. So they will continue to execute. There's still some more runway ahead of them.
So we heard that the CEO was talking about artificial intelligence being at a tipping point, bearing in mind that perhaps that's not the first time he said it. What do you think that the near future holds for AI? Where will it go next?
Well, it's still a long way to go, right? So at some point, everyone will have the chips that they need. Everyone will have what it takes. The infrastructure. Right now, we are at the infrastructure stage, and they are dominating that space, the chip space. Then we go into the software, the applications, and that's the next phase of the development. And NVIDIA is well positioned for that as well. And that's the beauty of NVIDIA. They have a full stack. Not only do they have the hardware, they're also well positioned in the software. And that's where the next growth is, the enterprise software business. It's going to be a huge multi-trillion-dollar opportunity, and they're well positioned for that. So it's not just a hardware play, it's a software play as well, and they have a competitive lead on that. They have a moat around that. So I think they will maintain that. So they will continue. Yes, the competition will come on, like it always does, but it'll take some time. And China will come on at some point. There are a lot of restrictions. They're introducing the new chips, so that will come back. It was like mid-single digit this time. It used to be 20%, so they need to get back there, but it's going to take a lot of time. But that's incremental to what they need. They don't need it right now. The other stuff, there's so much demand out there, so they can continue to execute on this at this pace.
No surprise, perhaps, the shares were up on the back of these numbers. Worldwide indices responded to them as well, particularly the Nikkei, as we were hearing from John there. How much was that record level down to tech stocks?
Absolutely, a lot of it. It's one of those cases of rising tide lifting a lot of boats, not only in Japan, but in Asia and in Europe. So it's a huge fundamental shift and a driver of every space. So technology is definitely a big factor in Nikkei's rise, but also Nikkei, there's a lot of other things going on. The whole setup, the environment, the investment climate is improving. The government is incentivizing people to come to the stock market. They've made some legislative changes, put in some stimulus packages. So they're kind of pulling people, the trillions of yen sitting in savings account. They're encouraging people to come into the stock market. So all those things are also supporting underlying fundamentals, the demand for the market. So tech is definitely leading the charge, but there's all underlying, the whole sentiment about investments and getting into the stock market is really helping, and that's what's driving Nikkei up.
Santosh, great to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us. That's Santosh Rao from Manhattan Venture Partners.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Chinese tech giant Lenovo posted stronger than expected earnings, with revenue returning to growth for the first time in 5 quarters. The world's largest manufacturer of computer products has seen business stall after the end of COVID lockdown, which had boosted sales to customers stuck at home. Profit did drop 23% in the third quarter to $337 million, but that was better than expected, and Lenovo shares were higher in Hong Kong trade.
Eurozone business activity fell in February for the 9th month in a row. The preliminary Composite Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, came in at 48.9 in February from 47.9 in January. The figure below 50 indicates contraction, although February's was the smallest rate of decline since June.
Rolls-Royce shares have surged after the British Aerospace Group more than doubled its annual profits in 2023. The company, which manufactures jet engines for commercial aircraft and a power system for ships and submarines, posted an underlying operation profit of $2 billion. The firm expects profit growth of at least 6% this year.
Nestlé has reported lower than expected sales, blaming the cost of living crisis for hitting household budgets. The world's biggest packaged food company said full-year net profit rose 20.9% to $12.8 billion, but margins were just below forecasts. The company says the pace of price rises will slow this year.
The shares in Mercedes-Benz have jumped 5% after a better-than-expected earnings report. Pre-tax profits for the German car maker came in at $4.7 billion in the fourth quarter. Revenue for the whole of 2023 is up 2%, but a bumpy road may still lie ahead. Our correspondent Peter Oliver has been talking to the company's CEO. Peter, can we call it a challenging time for European car makers?
Well, it is a challenging time for European car makers because cars are essentially expensive things and money's tight right across the board. When we spoke to Ola Kalanias, one of the things he was saying is that there is geopolitical uncertainty out there that will have an impact on the future, upon what comes. He did have a warning, essentially, for the European Union if it had any plans for placing protectionism against, on its own manufactured electric vehicles against Chinese vehicles coming into the market, saying to do that would potentially cause destruction for European car makers. It could basically backfire. We also spoke about the future for the Mercedes model when it comes to the electric motor. However, what we did hear from Mr. Kalanias was that they will be producing combustion engines for at least into the next decade. The reason for that being is that market forces want those combustion cars. The plan is still to make Mercedes an all-electric brand. However, people still want petrol cars. And while there's still a demand for them, they're still going to make them. What we did hear from the CEO of Mercedes, though, is it was a bumper year for purchases of their electric vehicles in 2023.
If we look at Mercedes-Benz cars, it was actually a 73% growth of battery electric vehicles for us last year. So very, very significant. But we can't expect this transformation to be a straight line. There will be peaks and troughs, and many things like building up charging infrastructure or incentivization will also drive what the market does. So in this case, we're happy that we're flexible in our plans. We can choose to produce either battery electric vehicles or high-tech combustion vehicles. So we will go with the market, but in terms of investments, full speed ahead with new vehicles in the pipeline.
Chinese EV manufacturers are coming into Europe right now. Mercedes is one of the biggest brands in the world when it comes to automotive industry. Are you looking over your shoulder a little bit at some of these Chinese brands coming in when it comes to the EV market, and do you have plans to combat them?
If we look back at our own history, it didn't take Gottlieb Daimler more than 15 years after he invented the car back in 1886 to say the German market is big, but the world is bigger, and went to the United States. So this phenomenon that car makers go around the world and want to test the markets and see what they can do, I think that's just natural progression. So whereas we take all competitors seriously, the ones that we know, and new competitors coming, you have to focus on your own strategy. You have to focus on delivering your brand promise. We are present in more than 150 countries in the world, and as we said, we went to China in a big way 15, 20 years ago. So we will focus on exploiting growth for Mercedes in every market in the world.
What's the future for Mercedes as a group? Who is the Mercedes buyer of the future in your eyes? And what's the Mercedes car of the future going to look like? 3 questions there for you.
If you're looking for the perfect combination, the perfect blend between innovation and technology, which Mercedes has always stood for as the ultimate and first pioneer of the auto industry, but you want to combine that with desirability, timeless elegance, iconic luxury. It is that perfect blend that Mercedes delivers. That's what we will focus on and try to delight customers around the world.
Commendable patience on display from Ola Kalanias as well, as I asked him repeatedly for some free samples. No such luck, though, as me and the cameraman are going to take the bus back now.
Thank you very much. That is our correspondent, Peter Oliver.
The leader of Boeing's troubled 737 MAX program is set to leave the company. The airline manufacturer has been under intense scrutiny after a piece of one of its jets blew out during a passenger flight in January. The departure of Ed Clark after nearly 18 years at Boeing is part of a wider shake-up. Boeing says the changes are aimed at improving quality and safety.
China's first domestically produced passenger plane hopes to compete with the likes of Boeing and Airbus in the future. The Comac C919 debuted this week at the Singapore Air Show. Our correspondent Mira Liu reports.
China is coming out in force at this year's Singapore Air Show, bringing its largest ever contingent and showing off its new C919, the country's first domestically developed passenger jet. It's a proud moment for China and Comac, and the interest from the aviation executives and the media is palpable.
This is the first overseas exhibition for the world's first C919. A lot of people come to see the aircraft. They're impressed by the layout, the color palette in the cabin, and the comfort level of the seats.
Comac kicked off the air show with a bang, announcing new orders for its C919 and ARJ21. The orders come as Comac attempts to position itself as a viable option for single-aisle jets, as Boeing and Airbus grapple with safety issues and delivery delays. But industry insiders say Comac must battle a strong headwind in breaking the duopoly.
It can be quite sensitive for a number of more westward-leaning countries to procure from non-traditional suppliers. Where we've seen some international success already is within Indonesia and Transnusa, having purchased some ARJ21s. And I think we can expect to see more regional airlines who are either more neutral politically or less inclined to buy from Western suppliers to procure more equipment from Comac.
Riding on the hype of Made in China aircraft, first-time exhibitor UAV manufacturer Aerospace Times Fei Peng had a great show in Singapore.
Our products here attract a lot of attention, so people are coming around and see, and they are curious about our technology, UAV transportation, and we see the demand, we see the attention from the public and also from the industry.
Attention aside, the burgeoning Chinese aviation industry has a lot to prove competing on a global stage.
I think it's the same with any new technology and any new entrant into a market. It's just proving the quality, proving that the relationship between cost, delivery, aftermarket care, the entire ecosystem of the technology of the aircraft is robust, it's trustworthy, suppliers and the supply chain is durable.
The good news is more people are set to fly. The IATA is expecting 4.7 billion people to travel this year, a historic high that is 4% above 2019. Competition will be fierce, but in the space of commercial aviation, the sky's the limit. Mira Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead. Israeli attacks destroyed dozens of homes in Gaza's city of Rafah as diplomatic efforts intensify to prevent a ground assault.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. China says it fully supports a two-state solution for the settlement of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
On the fourth day of hearings at the International Court of Justice about Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, China's representative has said establishing peace between Israel and Palestine is a core responsibility of the United Nations.
Let's talk to our correspondent, Julia Chapman, at The Hague. So, Julia, what has China said at this hearing?
China's representative called this moment a test, a litmus test for the collective conscience of humanity, and he outlined the legal arguments that have led China to believe that the Palestinians have a right to self-determination and that Israel is infringing on that right. Mr. Ma said that that right extends to armed struggle against occupation, which he said was distinct under international law from terror attacks. He also acknowledged that Israel has a right to defend itself, but said that self-defense had to be proportionate. And he urged the court, the International Court of Justice, to come to an advisory opinion on this situation, which he said would help pave the way for a negotiated settlement between Israelis and Palestinians. Here's what he said earlier.
China encourages both parties to accommodate each other's legitimate concerns, embrace the vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, continue negotiating for peaceful settlement, and work toward two states coexisting in peace and two peoples living side by side in harmony.
So, Julia, what have the other representatives been saying?
We've been hearing over the course of the week from more than 50 countries putting forward their legal arguments, starting off with the Palestinians on Monday, talking about the decades of what they call oppression at the hands of the Israelis. We've heard South Africa putting forward its case that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, which this same court urged it not to do. We've heard from Russia saying that Israel needs to end what it called collective punishment in Gaza, and France calling on Israel to comply with international law. But then, of course, we heard from the United States yesterday taking Israel's side and urging the court to consider Israel's security situation when it comes to making its advisory opinion. That sentiment was echoed by Hungary. We have not heard from any Israeli representative in person, but Israel has submitted a written statement dismissing the very premise on which the questions being put to this court are based, and saying that Israel has a right to its own self-defense. It isn't an occupying power, and any advisory opinion from this court could harm the peace process between the two.
Julia, thank you very much. Our correspondent Julia Chapman at The Hague.
In Gaza, Rafah has come under intense bombardment with Israeli strikes, killing more than 90 people overnight. Dozens of homes have been destroyed. Locals say it was one of their worst nights yet. More than 1 million people are sheltering in southern Gaza after fleeing fighting in the north. Israel has signaled some progress in ceasefire negotiations, adding to hopes that a full-scale ground assault can be prevented. Our correspondent Akram El-Satri has more from Rafah.
That was a very long and violent night for the Gazans who were taking shelter in Rafah, who were hoping they would stay safe. However, they have been extremely worried about the looming ground operation and have been interpreting any kind of a bombardment in any area of Rafah as an indication of a ground operation. Rafah lost today 19 people, while the over Gaza Strip lost around 132. So it's a continuous of the policy of targeting and destruction and killing, and they see in that as an imminent indication of the looming ground operation. People in Rafah, in particular, more than 1 million people, every single time they are hearing the bombardment, they are extremely terrified. They leave their tents, they run in the streets, they expect something major to happen to them, and this is how they have been living about the looming ground operation. Now the bombardment that took place, like you rightly said, was targeting dozens of homes, but also targeted several mosques in the area and central area, which is also an indicative of a plan that is being executed with an objective of the Israeli army to destroy as many infrastructures as possible. So the Palestinians in Rafah see in that as a continuation of the policy of preparing for the ground operation, while people in Gaza at large are still seeing more death and destruction because of the ongoing bombardment all over the Gaza Strip.
At least one person has been killed and several others injured in a shooting in the West Bank. Let's go to Israel now and talk to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates. Sarah, what happened in this attack and what's been the response from the government?
Robin, it happened during peak hour this morning on a road that connects West Bank settlements to Jerusalem. Israeli forces say that 3 Palestinian gunmen arrived in 2 separate cars. They opened fire on vehicles that were waiting around this checkpoint in some sort of a traffic jam. We do know that 1 person was killed, 5 others wounded. In the wake of this, Israeli forces then raided the village near Bethlehem where these 3 men allegedly come from. A number of people have since been detained. Now, after this shooting, the far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, he visited the scene. He is vowing now to put more restrictions on Palestinians, such as not allowing free prayer at the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, also potentially restricting the access on roads of Palestinian people and putting in more checkpoints. He also had this to say.
A very big disaster was prevented here thanks to the fact that all police officers in the Israeli police are carrying weapons, and thanks to the fact that citizens have weapons. We are handing out more and more weapons. I was criticised for this policy 6 months ago, but I think that today everyone understands that weapons save lives. I remind you that 6 months ago I said clearly that the right to life outweighs the right to freedom of movement of residents of the Palestinian Authority.
The far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, he's also weighing in, calling on Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, to immediately approve additional housing unit plans for the West Bank settlements.
And there seems to possibly be some progress on ceasefire negotiations. What have we heard from Israeli leaders?
Certainly seems that way. The Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, he's just held a meeting with the US Mideast envoy, Brett McGurk. He has told him that we will expand the authority given to these hostage negotiators. And it is being reported in Hebrew media that Israeli officials are watching these talks in Cairo extremely closely. And if there is some sort of a softening on Hamas's position, then an Israeli delegation that includes the Mossad chief David Barnea will be sent to Paris tomorrow to kick off these talks once again with the Qatari Prime Minister, Egypt's spy chief, and the CIA Director, Bill Burns. This is the same type of talks that we saw a couple of months ago that saw these other hostages released. Still no confirmation on that, Israeli officials remaining extremely tight-lipped, but we do know that this Mideast envoy McGurk, he's now meeting with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for talks on this exact topic to get these hostages home. He'll also be pressing Israel and the Prime Minister on this potential operation inside Rafah, and there will be a War Cabinet meeting held a little later this evening.
Sarah, thank you very much. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv.
Diplomatic efforts to secure a ceasefire and prevent a full-scale Israeli assault in Rafah are intensifying. Thomas Pickering is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Jordan and Israel.
Current situation in Gaza, of course, is horrific. The number of deaths on both sides, but particularly the extraordinary number of Palestinians killed in the fighting in Gaza is something that obviously the world community should be totally concerned about and working hard to try to stop the slaughter and find ways on the path toward a peaceful solution to the long-standing issue between Israel and the Palestinians.
And the United States has vetoed calls for immediate ceasefire in Gaza 3 times already. In its latest veto on Tuesday, it said the draft resolution would jeopardize the sensitive negotiations on the captives taken by Hamas and other armed groups. So how is the US-led resolution fundamentally different from the one put forward by Algeria?
The U.S. explained that its concern was that the question of dealing with the hostages was not included in the Algerian resolution. I believe that it has attempted to try to include in its proposed draft that particular issue, as well as serious and deep cautions to Prime Minister Netanyahu about going into Rafah without a very significant and well-thought-out plan to protect the civilians, something that appears to have been lacking up until now.
And do you think behind this is because the U.S. thinks that it should lead the talks?
I think that the U.S. believes that the problem has humanitarian aspects of great significance and very important requirements that should be met as soon as possible. That secondly, it is very important to move a process ahead which can then be evolved into something that American administrations have been seeking off and on for 30 or 40 years, which is a peaceful negotiated solution leading to 2 states, a state of Israel and a state of Palestine, living in peace under the broadest kind of international support and guarantees.
And do you think Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will heed U.S. calls to halt his plans for Rafah offensive?
It's an excellent question, and so far he's been very negative on this subject. It doesn't mean that we have seen the end of the process. Hopefully that President Biden, whose policy is, I've watched closely, evolved over the last 3 months, is now seeking, I believe, a much more robust position with respect to how and in what way the resolution of this tragic and catastrophic situation can be achieved. And hopefully he will be able further to strengthen the U.S. commitment in that direction. I don't know whether they will submit their resolution to the Council or not, but it has within it, if I could call it, the beginnings of a capacity to make real progress.
The UK Parliament has descended into chaos over a vote on a ceasefire in Gaza. Angry MPs staged a walkout in the House of Commons on Wednesday night and vented their fury at Speaker Lindsay Hoyle, who they accused of tipping the scales in favour of the opposition Labour Party.
More than 60 MPs now say they have no confidence in the Speaker, who has since apologised. The Palestinian envoy to the UK has described the scenes in Parliament as disgraceful, saying it was British politics at its lowest. Our correspondent Yola Abdawith is following the story. So, Yola, help us understand, how come arguments over a debate about Gaza and the ceasefire developed into a political row in UK Parliament?
And that's why it's been criticised, and I think that's why the politicians have been criticised, including the role of Speaker in Parliament, who's supposed to be neutral, even though he happens to be a Member of Parliament for Labour in a constituency in the north of England. When a sitting MP is chosen, he or she has to be neutral between all the different parties. There are two main parties in Britain, Labour and Conservative, the ruling party now, but there are other parties too. And the reason why Lindsay Hoyle has been accused of favouring his own party and possibly influenced by the leader of that party, Sir Keir Starmer, who might well be the next Prime Minister of Britain, is because the Scottish National Party had called for to table a motion, a request, to debate a ceasefire in Gaza. And they've been trying to do that for a while. They called that amendment. It's been a divisive argument within the two major parties. Labour has also had its problems because there were MPs who wanted to have a ceasefire and to strengthen the language used by politicians because, of course, they claim that what's happening now in Gaza is awful in terms of ordinary people, but at the same time recognising that Hamas attacked Israel, how many people were killed on October the 7th, 1,200, 240 hostages, some of them are still there. So it's the balance of language. What is seen as disgraceful and why Hussein Somlot, the Palestinian envoy for the UK, used such strong language, he said, we are seeing MPs at their very worst because they're using the crisis in Gaza for political point scoring in Britain and in Parliament. And that's why it's been accused. That's why 63 MPs want to see Lindsay Hoyle step down. They don't have any confidence in him. And I think it also, there's a stronger point here. It switches people off when they see a process like that being what they would accuse of being abused, and then people are saying, well, what are these politicians about? Are they about their own ambitions and their own careers?
So how does what's happened reflect on British Parliament, as well as the current government and the party who hope to be the next government, the opposition Labour Party?
Well, it doesn't reflect well on probably any of the parties if they are using politics in such a way. Now, the leader of the Scottish National Party, which is the third largest party in Parliament, he's saying, we don't have any confidence in Lindsay Hoyle. I don't think probably at the moment that he will resign or have to go because the Liberal Democrats, most of the ministers in the UK government and the Labour front bench still have support for Lindsay Hoyle. But I think there's more reflection today on why it descended into the chaos that we saw with the Conservative members of Parliament, SNP members of Parliament walking out, and then basically a Labour gerrymandered motion was accepted without a vote. And I think that point scoring has carried on today from what I've heard in Parliament. And just to give you an example how things have possibly worsened over the last few years, we've had five prime ministers in the last 5 years, which is unheard of in a long, long time in British politics. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had Partygate. Here's a list. There are 25 names on this list scandals involving members of Parliament in the last 4 years, since the last election. Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, appears 5 times in that list for various misdemeanours and scandals. So people are saying, look, something's gone wrong with politicians, with the parties, and trust in the parties is probably ebbing. Having said that, Hoyle, the Speaker today, said, I have to think about the welfare of MPs. There are concerns about people being hostile to people on social media, trolling them and so on. 2 MPs have been killed, one in 2016 and one in 2021. So there is that care and welfare for MPs as well. But it's a very volatile, and it was a very controversial decision.
Yolo, thank you very much. Our correspondent Yolo Abdavid.
You're watching CGTN Still Ahead. After recent gains in Ukraine, Russia signals it could try to seize the capital Kiev again as the conflict nears its 3rd year.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Li Jianhua. The headlines again. NVIDIA says artificial intelligence is at a tipping point. Stocks surge as the world's most valuable chip maker reports record revenue.
Mercedes-Benz posts solid fourth quarter earnings, but its CEO is wary of growing competition from Chinese rivals.
And China urges the United Nations top court to speak out on what it says is unlawful Israeli occupation.
A top advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin has signalled that Moscow could again try to capture Ukraine's capital. Dmitry Medvedev says that for Russia to achieve all its military goals, its troops may one day push on to Kyiv.
It comes after a failed attempt to seize the city early in the conflict. The former Russian Prime Minister and ex-president also says Moscow wants to take the Black Sea port of Odessa.
In Ukraine, a train line connecting the capital to the east of the country has been busy carrying soldiers to the battlefield. As the conflict between Russia and Ukraine enters its 3rd year, the journey has become a familiar route for many. Our correspondent Megumi Lim reports.
At 6 a.m., this railway station in Kyiv is already bustling, especially on this platform from where an intercity train takes passengers to the east of the country. Many are in military attire, hours away from returning to the front lines. The final stop is Kramatorsk, a key hub for the Ukrainian army.
The Kyiv-Kramatorsk train line has become one of the busiest train routes in Ukraine. Most of the passengers are soldiers or the loved ones of soldiers. It's a 7-hour journey, making it the fastest connection from the capital to the war-torn east.
Rail services were disrupted during the early days of the conflict, but with air travel still suspended, passenger numbers have returned to their usual levels. Close to 25 million people used the railway last year. On board this train, soldiers get their final peaceful snooze. For many, with no end in sight to the conflict, breaks don't come very often.
I want to see my family. That is the most important thing. When there is at least a day, it's enough time to go home and see them.
Vast landscapes emerge as the train crosses the heart of the country known for its grain and sunflower fields, scenes that have become familiar for the loved ones of soldiers. Milana, who is going to see her husband, spends this time thinking about their future.
My husband and I are planning to have a child, and I hope that it will be born in a free Ukraine without any war. This small blanket is for our future child.
But for others like Mariana, this journey is a first. She decided to volunteer as a translator for foreign medics treating Ukrainian soldiers.
Of course, I donate, I spread the information, I try to do as much as I can as a civilian, but it's different. I feel guilty in some point not doing more.
The journey itself does not come without risks. The Kramatorsk railway station was struck by a missile in April of 2022. This is why Olena has left her children behind as she travels to meet their father, who is serving as a medic's driver.
He doesn't really let me come either, but this is all that I'm asking for. I say, please, if you have a chance, let me know so I can come. But as for the children, he says that not even for a moment should they be brought here.
As the conflict between Russia and Ukraine enters its third year, a sense of fatigue hangs over the country. And with additional funding from the US stalled, the fight has become more difficult. But those on the front lines don't have the luxury of slowing down. Volodymyr is rushing back to the battlefield after spending Valentine's Day with his girlfriend.
It is mentally very difficult. We went through good physical training, but it's difficult mentally to be there all the time. But we cannot give up. There is no way back, because our families, loved ones and children are counting on us.
Although the conflict has torn families apart, this is the train that keeps them connected. Megumi Lim, CGTN, on the train to Kramatorsk, Ukraine.
The mother of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny says she has seen his body and claims she's now being pressured over the terms of his funeral. Lyudmila Navalny's filed a lawsuit when her son's body was not immediately handed over after his death at a jail in the Siberian Arctic last week. Navalny's team have said on social media that his death certificate just released claims he died of natural causes. His mother has accused Russian authorities of attempting to force a private burial without mourners. The Kremlin has rejected claims that Alexei Navalny was killed in a state-sponsored attack.
Dozens of people are feared dead after an illegal gold mine collapsed in Venezuela. The open-pit Star Bula mine is in a remote jungle area. More than 100 injured survivors were taken to the nearest hospital. Relief teams and rescue workers have been sent to the mine.
5 people have been killed after a container ship collided with a bridge in the Chinese city of Guangzhou. Local authorities say crew error caused the ship to ram into the bridge structure, knocking 4 vehicles and 1 electric motorcycle off the roadway. 2 injured people are being treated in hospital. The ship owner has been detained.
Hospitals in South Korea are delaying or cancelling surgeries as a mass strike by doctors enters a third day. It's reported that 5 of the biggest hospitals in the capital Seoul have cancelled up to a third of planned surgeries, including caesarean sections and radiotherapy for cancer patients. The government has threatened to arrest those responsible for the walkout. Doctors are protesting over plans to expand the number of students admitted to medical schools.
US Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley says she believes frozen embryos created through IVF are babies. The former UN ambassador was reacting to the ruling by the Alabama Supreme Court that embryos are children.
The court's decision will have far-reaching consequences for people wanting a baby through freezing embryos and undergoing in vitro fertilization or IVF. Our correspondent Poppy Mputing reports.
The Alabama Supreme Court ruling that frozen embryos are children under state law is another step back for reproductive rights in the U.S. In the majority 7-2 decision made by the all-Republican court, Justice Jay Mitchell wrote, "Unborn children are children, without exception based on developmental stage, physical location, or any other ancillary characteristics." With frozen embryos considered children, this decision has far-reaching impacts for Alabama families undergoing IVF to have a child. IVF often requires the harvesting of many eggs from a woman, then fertilizing them to create multiple embryos. Typically, one embryo is implanted at a time, while the others are frozen for later use or discarded. Under the Alabama ruling, experts are worried about liability. The state's largest healthcare provider, the University of Alabama at Birmingham, has already suspended its IVF program. In a statement to CGTN, spokesperson Hannah Eccles said, "We are saddened that this will impact our patients' attempt to have a baby through IVF. But we must evaluate the potential that our patients and our physicians could be prosecuted criminally." The issue of reproductive rights is highly divisive in the U.S. In terms of the political map, conservative Republican states tend to swing anti-abortion, while majority Democrat states mostly back women's rights to make decisions on reproductive health. However, some Republican states have seen backlash at the ballot box, with voters choosing to support abortion rights measures. Activists on both sides of the argument often go head-to-head in the streets. And in the courts, especially since 2022, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that protected a woman's right to an abortion. Advocates and politicians who support reproductive rights have been sounding the alarm ever since about the potential domino effects now playing out in individual states. Poppy Mputing, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching CGTN Still Ahead. China's plan for more giant pandas ahead worldwide as Spain says adios to one of its favorite furry families.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A privately owned spacecraft is on track to make history as it attempts to land on the moon after a week-long voyage. A six-legged robot lander named Odysseus was built by a Texas-based company and is currently in lunar orbit. If successful, it would be the first US moon landing since Apollo 17, more than 50 years ago.
A giant plan for giant pandas. China is set to send 2 new pairs of the cuddly-looking animals to zoos in the US and Spain.
The China Wildlife Conservation Association has recently signed agreements with both countries to help boost global conservation. It comes as Madrid Zoo says adios to a panda couple after nearly 2 decades. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
A fond farewell to Madrid's most lovable family. Chinese giant panda couple Hua Zuiba and Bing Xing arrived at Madrid Zoo in 2007 as a gift of friendship from China to Spain. After 17 years of service and 6 cubs born in the country, Mom and Dad are ready for a new life in China. The family will stay together too, 5 members traveling to Chengdu. China's ambassador to Spain, Yao Jing, talked of the family as a symbol of friendship between the 2 nations.
Through this joint research, through this joint protection, through these joint efforts, that we are increasing our mutual understanding. So I think that through this kind of cooperation, this kind of bond, our mutual understanding, friendship, and also mutual care about the world have been enhanced and promoted.
Hua and Bing are parents of the zoo's current star attractions, twin giant panda cubs Yo-Yo and Jojo. But now it's time to head to the Chengdu Panda Research Center. Spain's panda lovers need not be too disappointed though, as China has promised to send a younger couple in their place. The news was announced by Foreign Minister Wang Yi earlier in the week, to the delight of many across Spain. Well, it's a sad day on one hand, saying goodbye to Bing Xing and family here at the Madrid Zoo. It's also a success story in collaboration with the China Wildlife Conservation Association, and 6 new panda cubs being brought into the world. Chinese giant panda numbers in the wild have risen from 1,100 in the 80s to almost 2,000 in 2023. With 728 more pandas in zoos and protection centres around the world, like the one in Madrid. It's a species that has gone from endangered to vulnerable status. Now Madrid Zoo awaits its new arrivals with anticipation.
The best could be that we are able to breed again with the young couple, and maybe we try natural mating instead artificial insemination, that it was needed here, but we hope that we breed successfully too.
No farewell party would be complete without a slice of bamboo cake. The perfect retirement present. Ken Brown, CGTN, Madrid.
And finally, scientists have solved one of the great mysteries of the ocean. We've long known that whales can create a haunting song-like sound underwater, and now we finally know how. The studies found that a type of whales have a special voice box which allows them to recycle air underwater and communicate with each other.
And that is for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.